Hi, this is Patty Hodge and Dr. Nurses Rock. Today, we're filming another video in a series of 30 videos on the topic of grief throughout the month of April. And our very special guest today is Dr. Greer Raggio. Greer is a clinical health psychologist in private practice at Health Psychology Partners in Washington, D.C. She works with adults navigating a range of health-related and life challenges with a focus on the connection between physical health, emotional well-being, and behavior. Her work includes supporting clients through medical concerns, life transitions, and experiences of loss and grief. So I want to say a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Patty. Happy
Thank
to
you
be
for being
here.
here. Thank you. I really appreciate you being here. The way that I found Greer is through an article that you wrote about obesity and grief. I think that was where it was.
Mhm.
And the reason I started looking for that is because I'm a nurse and we're always looking for ways to prevent problems with people, especially when they're in some kind of stressful, traumatic situation. And I did read that people's BMI tends to increase in a time of grief. So I was just interested. And since you do this work, I thought you would be the person to find to talk to us about it.
Yeah, I'm so
So
happy to be here. Thank you.
thank you for doing that. So tell us tell us about the article. What happened there?
Yeah. It was actually a companion article to an invited talk that a colleague of mine in my practice and our practice gave. We do a lot of work with the Obesity Action Coalition, which is the organization that published this article. And the reason is because we're a health psychology practice, so we work with people on health behaviors broadly, but weight and disordered eating is kind of a core specialty of ours. And so a lot of the people that I work with face lifelong challenges with their eating, with weight, generally on the overweight or living with obesity end of things. And so it's a very relevant area for us. Also, with grief in particular, for better or worse, right? It can be very difficult, obviously, but everyone experiences grief and loss. Even if that doesn't totally resonate with someone, everyone definitely experiences periods of extreme stress. And our lives are thrown upside down. Our bodies are also impacted. And so, what almost always, if not always, does happen, and that is that there's some change in our appetite, our cravings, or at the very least, because of a change in routine, our ability to eat and move in the way that we normally do. So I think it's very relevant for the people I work with, and even for folks who don't face challenges with weight and eating, it's going to come up at some point. And so I think it's an important topic.
I agree, and I'm glad that you're going to tell us more about it. I think there is a cultural piece for me around food because I was raised by the Sicilian half of the family, and a lot of things happened around the table. But when there was grief, it was more ammunition came to the table. Okay, so the big meals and the and again the disruption in life, especially if there was a loss, a death of someone. So
Yeah.
my heart goes out to anyone that's dealing with that kind of struggle. And I'm wondering what can we do to help somebody that's maybe on the verge of having troubles with their food?
Yeah. Yeah. There are a lot of things. But I think, as a loved one or a provider, um, listening and asking questions in ideally a non-probing way. And what I mean by that is, something between, hey, how can I help? Because oftentimes people are too overwhelmed to know what they need, but also not enforcing what you think you would want or have wanted in the past when you were in a period of grief, meaning not making assumptions about what that person wants or needs. Everyone, just like everyone grieves differently, people also have very varying relationships with their bodies and with food. And some people, and I think that this is the kind of surprising aspect for a lot of people when they think about or when they read and learn about grief and weight, is that, our weight can go up, and on average it tends to, right? But it can also go down. It can also fluctuate. And I think, the stereotype of a grieving person is that they lose their appetite and they're depressed and they sort of are shut-ins and they lose weight. And that can happen, but not always. And so it really matters that person's in specific to weight and eating, how that person has in the past related to their body, how they've managed other periods of stress, what's happened in their eating. If the person does struggle with emotional eating or struggles to take care of themselves, meaning getting out of the house, then the question for a loved one or a provider is, maybe would it be helpful to work on that? Would it be helpful to have some accountability or support around, healthy eating, or, having one meal a day versus grazing all day, right? Or someone who can check in and say, hey, do you want to go for a walk or a stroll? Um, if it's sort of the opposite, right? If that person in times of stress or maybe in previous times of grief tends to be very rigid and self-critical and just expects themselves to do everything that they have always done, including, home cooked meals and gym 3 times a week and all of that, then it's kind of gently challenging that and reminding them that grief disrupts everything, and it's okay, if not very, very normal, for things to not be normal, meaning for your activities and routines to be different for a while, and that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear that for sure. I know that some people have start out with an eating problem or eating disorder to begin with, and that if they're in thrown into a grief situation, it may exacerbate that, or they may have a relapse, depending on what's going on with them. So it's something I think in families that have these issues, there's already worry to begin with, right? So some of what I hope is that we can take some of the worry out of the picture for people and sort of normalize what's happening when they're experiencing grief. But then if we do see something that's worrying, what do we do? So you're saying we can step in ways that are not intrusive,
Yeah.
that can be helpful.
Yeah. And I think, if it's someone who has struggled with, or, at the time of the loss, is currently struggling in a serious way or a very upsetting way with their weight or eating, that, having some professional support or just a space where they can say what they want to say without worrying about someone else's opinions, or maybe hurting someone's feelings, or maybe that friend or family member is also being affected by the loss, right? And so I think that's where the professional kind of therapy space or support groups can really come in. Otherwise, yeah, I think it's checking in, asking for what would be helpful for them, giving examples, right? Because again, oftentimes people are overwhelmed and are not sure. Um, but trying. Because oftentimes what will happen is someone says, yeah, I'm kind of struggling, maybe I'm grazing a lot, I have a lot of sugar cravings, I'm handling it, it's fine, I'm not sure what you can do. And that could be the truth, right? But still checking in with that person, taking a guess at what could be helpful to them based on knowing that person,
Yeah.
and probably pretty well if you're wanting to support them through grief. And then asking for feedback also, right? Is that meal that I dropped off for you, was that helpful? Did you like it? Is that helping you kind of move in the direction you want to go, or not? If not, what would be better? Or, is it actually helpful that I'm texting you to go for a walk with me? Or, does that feel like pressure maybe? So it's asking for that feedback and being okay if the answer is, yeah, that's not too helpful. Sorry.
There's so much stigma around weight and so a big lack of information around weight and
Yeah.
eating and sustenance and more criticism than there has to be, I think, when we're talking about something that everybody has to do. We have to eat to stay alive, and we can't always be perfect in anything. And so when we're in grief, to give ourselves some grace and to give the next person some grace about what's going on, but
Mhm.
also to be aware that things can become problematic. And if they're not, let them be,
Hmm.
basically, right?
Very well said.
So, I think one of the things that people are not aware of are the hormonal changes that happen with people. And as a nurse, I want to be at least put that out there that grief will change your body chemistry.
Yeah.
And even if you're not changing your eating habits per se, something is happening in your body. And inflammation is a big part of what happens in weight problems. And that is exacerbated by stress and by cortisol. So it's a complicated thing. Food is not that easy to deal with, right? And I'm not talking about even addictive behavior towards food. You mentioned cravings for sweets. That that may be a chemical thing that's happening for this person.
Yep, absolutely. And or I mean, it generally is a combination of something real that's going on in the body in response to stress and the other important health behaviors that are impacted, like sleep. Um, but also emotional in nature, right? I mean, from a biological perspective, humans are meant to want sugar and high calorie things. It's just kind of the evolutionary, part of it, whether we like it or not. But also, think about the associations that a lot of us have with sugar, right? From when we were kids, for example, or as adults, anytime during life, birthday cake, right? Friday night pizza, right? Not sugar, but that's, kind of like a stereotype of the
Sure.
ways that we celebrate with food. And so, for wanting to feel better, it's pretty normal to have food be part of that coping strategy.
Yes. And it may be something that we learn to do this very young. We have to eat to live. And so the habits that we have developed from our youth, we carry into our adulthood. And we can be as mindful, I think, as we want about what we're eating and how we're taking care of our bodies. We're just not going to get it right all the time.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that I would feel very safe coming to you for help if I was in grief and I needed some assistance with making choices or making life changes. But what what would you do? If people are using food as their coping mechanism, how would you help them?
Yeah. Yeah, I think number one, and as a therapist, right, this is kind of what we do. We tend to focus on sort of the mindset and emotional aspect of it, is I really want to work with that person on shame, self-criticism, and trying to shift from judgment to a place of curiosity and, even connection with the body. Meaning that, sure, long term, binge eating, only eating sugar, right? That's not good for our body, but we're not talking about permanent, right? Because grief or the what grief looks like in the beginning, it's not permanent. It changes over time, right?
Exactly.
So we're talking about temporary changes, right? And changes that person is engaging in for a reason, right? Their body and their brain are looking for ways to heal.
Right.
And so, changing that narrative from, what's wrong with me? I'm a failure to, okay, this is happening. And I don't really like it, but I understand why it's happening, right? And then actually working to understand, what could this craving or this change mean about what I need, right? Or what my body is really wanting. Right? If someone's finding themselves grazing all day, I want to think about what could that be about? It could be a habit, right, that was formed from when they're very young in response to stress, but you know, let's be more granular about it, right? When we're grazing or never allowing ourselves to feel hungry, right? We're sort of sparing ourselves any amount of distress, right? Because hunger can be distressing. Um, Constant feeding is an activity, right? It can feel like a companion, right? There are just so many uses or roles for food in these moments. And so being curious about what is happening and what it means about the body. I think secondly, it's also mindset, but it has more practical implications, which is go from what the shoulds or that kind of all or nothing, more perfectionistic sort of mindset to a good enough approach, right? So that means small goals. It means saying, this is a time of grief. It's nothing is normal. So the way I behave and relate to food is and my body is probably not going to be normal either. That doesn't mean I have to give up, right? Let's
Right.
just reframe what normal means right now or what, doing enough means right now. So
Yeah.
again, instead of if you're a person who normally cooks all three meals and, you're expecting yourself to do that, that could be possible, but for most people, it's not, right? And so let's figure out an in between. It's not going to be that, but maybe it's also not eating only chips and ice cream all day, right?
Well, one of the things that I can say is in the very beginning of this last big grief that I was addressing in my life was the loss of my family member. And then I had major losses attached to that. I left my home, I left my family, I left my friends, I left my job, and moved to a new state, into a different home with people who were grieving and
Yeah.
animals who are grieving, right? And I'm grieving. So I couldn't even put a bowl of cereal together without serious intention because I didn't know where the things were and what do I do first? Do I get the bowl first or do I get the milk first or where's the cereal? Where's the spoons? So it was that kind of chaotic thing going on. Um, and ultimately, that's just the beginning parts of serious grief, right? I don't know that I ever put the name grief on that,
Hmm.
right? I knew that we were all sad, that we were all missing this person, that we wanted life to be more normal, and we wanted things to go well. But I wasn't thinking clearly. My concentration wasn't there. I couldn't read a book. Um, and so food was something that it had to be the constant, right? There were people that animals needed to be fed, people needed to be fed. And that was the only thing that I could think of that I could literally do
Yeah.
uh, when I was not thinking well enough, right? So thankfully, neighbors were kind. They would bring dishes and all. But that also ends.
True.
And then we have to deal with the day-to-day life of, okay, what do we do now when we also had the additional challenge of a person on the spectrum here who had very picky eating habits. So I might be cooking three different meals in a day's time. And I
Oh,
was really tired of thinking about food. Greer, really tired.
I bet.
So, and then of course we had COVID and
Yeah.
life changed for everybody and nobody was going outside. And then we weren't getting the exercise that we needed. And the exercise of walking up and down the stairs was not enough to prevent 10 pounds from coming on, or 20 pounds even at that point. And so weight has always been a struggle for me from childhood. So these experiences here really made me more mindful of what people must be going through in their own houses when they're dealing with some kind of serious loss. And it may be totally different from what we were experiencing here, but
Yeah.
something must have been similar. And I'm thinking that not putting, not knowing about grief, if I had the words for that, the names for that, right? That's why I'm doing this, is to help people put a name on what has happened to them.
Yeah, I think labels, while sometimes they can be stigmatizing, I think more times than not, they're helpful. to have some kind of vocabulary to describe what you're experiencing. And because there's an existing word, also knowing that it exists for a reason because
Right.
other people have that too. And so it's a reminder that you're not alone.
And one of the things in another video in this series someone mentioned was that he didn't know he was grieving
Hmm.
until his friend said, "I think you're grieving."
Hmm.
And so that was interesting to me, that
Yeah.
sometimes we have to point that out to people. I think you might be depressed. I think you might be really anxious there. I think you're grieving, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
especially since there are so many different types of grief,
Yes.
right? And a lot that isn't recognized more as widely as it should
Which
be,
is why we may be reaching for food inappropriately too. It doesn't have to be the death of someone,
right?
right? And these are the ways that we've learned to cope over time. We may have other losses that we're not naming as losses.
Absolutely.
And that also contributes to disordered eating in some way. I don't want to put a negative term there, but I'm a clinician. And, sometimes we fall into the trap of not doing things in a healthy way.
Yes.
So, is there something more that you really want to address that you think people should know in the work that you do with people, or just about grief in general with their eating, or
Yeah. I think if there's one message I can drive home is that whatever you're experiencing and however, your life has changed or your eating habits have changed, it's not abnormal. It's also not permanent. What is normal, again, is that, you're trying to make yourself feel better in some way.
right?
Long term, we want that to be adaptive and inch toward a healthier kind of way of doing that. But the fact that things have changed and your appetite has changed and even your weight has changed, not surprising, totally normal. I think that, if that is a struggle though, asking for help, be it professional or, it for broader probably grief or grieving from friends and family is really important. We're really not meant to grieve alone. People need people. And so it's really important. And, again, like I said before, if you don't know what to ask for, that's okay. But at the very least, try to accept offers of help, and then make a point to provide feedback if it's off the mark. Um,
Yeah.
right.
And if you're not the one grieving and you're the helper, make sure that you just step into the loop. That even though it looks like that person doesn't want what you're doing, they want something, they need something, and it's okay to be involved in that grief with that
Yeah.
support that you're offering to people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd say another thing that I haven't mentioned is just trying to stay connected to your body. And I want to emphasize that this, can be a very minimal sort of low bar practice, right? This doesn't mean going to yoga every day. It doesn't mean, anything extreme, but gentle movement, even just some deep breathing, stuff that has nothing to do with food necessarily. And the reason for that is that when we're under stress, right, or we're grieving, we tend to not only sometimes separate from the outside world, but we kind of disengage from our bodies too, and we're sort of retreated into our brains, or maybe just feeling numb, right? And so it is important to have some connection to your body, which then will help, I think, to notice how your body feels when you're eating in a certain way, noticing feeling full, right? When we're totally disengaged from our body, you're probably not going to get those signals of satiety, right? Like you normally would. And so trying to encourage that connection, but again, in a gentle way, small goals, nothing extreme.
We have had other presenters here throughout the series who have done some mind body exercises with people, and so people can go through the series and find something to do. Someone mentioned an app that people use in times of first aid for emotional trauma. So yeah, I hope that this series is offering people tools and not just information. We're not just talking heads at people. We are people who have had feelings, who have had experiences, who want people not to suffer unnecessarily. And so I'm so grateful to you for having come forward to talk to me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honestly so admiring of and grateful to you for having this series. It's a topic that again everyone experiences loss and grief, but we don't talk about it enough. And so I really appreciate this
Well, I
platform.
hope you come back.
I would love to.
And I know you have colleagues, so we'll ask them to come along with you, maybe. And
Absolutely.
we'll continue this conversation. This will not end after 30 days. I'm noticing that there's a lot of interest and a lot more to say about grief. And
Definitely.
and grief and sustenance was our topic for today. So thank you for that. And hopefully I'll see you again soon. But for now, we'll say bye for now.
Yes. Thank you
Uh,
so much.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.